I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the dock worker sprinting toward me, waving his arms like he was directing an emergency landing. His face was red, his eyes wide, and before I could even ask what happened, he yelled, "Your boat! It's gone!" For a second, my brain refused to process his words. Gone? My boat? That wasn't possible. I had tied it up myself, double-knotted, like always. It wasn't some flimsy rental. It was my pride and joy, the Sea Breeze, a boat I had spent years perfecting. Then the real horror hit me. This wasn't just any theft. This was her. Karen. I whipped around, scanning the water, and there she was, a blonde menace in a sun hat, gripping the wheel of my boat like she owned it. Music blared from the speakers, and she was waving at confused boaters like she was royalty. My stomach dropped. She said she was just taking it for a quick ride, the dock worker stammered. Quick ride? That was a phrase you used for borrowing someone's bike. Not a damn boat. I could feel my pulse hammering in my skull as I fumbled for my phone. I barely registered Jim, my best friend, jogging up beside me, mid-sip from his iced coffee. "What's going on?" he asked. Then he followed my gaze and did a double-take. "Wait, is that? No. No way. Oh, it's her," I gritted through clenched teeth. Karen had been a thorn in my side for months, a walking, talking tornado of entitlement. She lived a few houses down and had made it very clear that she believed boats should be shared among the community. Her reasoning? Not everyone can afford one, and that's just unfair. The last time I'd seen her, she had been passive-aggressively admiring my boat, sighing loudly about how she wished she had one, how unfair it was that some people just hoarded luxury items. I had laughed it off, never imagining she would actually have the audacity to steal it. But there she was, at the helm of my boat. I could already see the disaster unfolding. Karen was no captain. Hell, I doubted she even knew how to start a lawnmower, let alone steer a vessel. She was tilting wildly, swerving between boats, ignoring the angry shouts of actual sailors. Jim let out a low whistle. "Well, buddy, you're either gonna need a lawyer or the Coast Guard." I was already dialing. The marina security was a joke, so I went straight to the real authorities. As I waited for the Coast Guard to pick up, I gritted my teeth, watching Karen take a selfie with her phone in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. "Coast Guard, what's your emergency?" "Yes, hi. My boat's been stolen." That got their attention. "Stolen? Do you have a description?" "Oh yeah," I said, my voice tight. "It's a 24-foot cruiser named Sea Breeze, currently being piloted by a lunatic in a sun hat who has no idea what she's doing." Jim choked on his coffee. "Did you just call her a lunatic to the Coast Guard?" The officer on the line paused, then asked in a perfectly neutral voice, "Do you know the individual?" "Unfortunately, yes." I could hear keys clacking on the other end. "We're dispatching a patrol boat now." "Is she armed?" I watched Karen attempt to do some sort of twirl with the boat, nearly taking out a dock ladder. "Only with stupidity," I muttered. Jim was now recording the entire thing on his phone. "Dude, this is gold. We're gonna be famous." I didn't care about fame. I cared about getting my boat back in one piece. Karen, meanwhile, was having the time of her life. She was taking another selfie, captioning it who knows what, probably something like "living my best life." Yacht life, baby. A fisherman in a tiny skiff had to throw himself overboard as she nearly mowed him down. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. The Coast Guard officer came back on the line. "We have a visual on your vessel. Our team is moving in. Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said immediately. Jim raised an eyebrow at me. "You sure about that?" I turned to look at him, incredulous. "She stole my boat, Jim." He sipped his coffee, unfazed. "Yeah, but think about the memes. You could be a legend." Before I could respond, a burst of static crackled over the phone, and I could hear the Coast Guard radioing in. "We have the suspect in sight. She appears uncooperative." Uncooperative? I squinted. Karen had just taken off her sun hat and was now arguing with the Coast Guard, waving her phone in their faces like she was trying to prove she had permission to be on my boat. I shoved my phone at Jim and took off down the dock, trying to get a better look. My gut twisted as I saw her swerving yet again, nearly side-swiping another boat. Jim jogged after me. "You're not gonna jump in, are you?" I wanted to, but I wasn't stupid. The Coast Guard had this. But that didn't mean I wasn't going to watch every second of Karen's impending downfall. As I reached the edge of the dock, I could see the patrol boat closing in on her. A Coast Guard officer was shouting instructions through a bullhorn, but Karen was ignoring them. Then, to my horror, she gunned the engine. "Oh, you idiot," I shouted. The boat lurched forward, Karen laughing like this was some kind of game. But Karma? Oh, Karma wasn't having it. With an ear-splitting crunch, the sea breeze slammed into a buoy, jarring Karen forward so hard she nearly face-planted onto the wheel. The Coast Guard wasted no time. Within seconds, officers were boarding my boat, securing the engine, and yanking Karen away from the controls. She was screeching, flailing her arms like a toddler denied a toy. I was gonna bring it back. The officers weren't amused. One of them grabbed her by the wrist as she kept babbling. "It's not stealing if I return it. It's a borrow." "A borrow?" Jim doubled over laughing. "Did she just say a borrow? Oh man, this is priceless." I wasn't laughing. I was too busy staring at my boat, my beautiful, damaged boat. The hull had a nasty dent from the collision, and I could already tell I'd be dealing with repairs. My stomach churned. One of the Coast Guard officers signaled to me. "Sir, are you the owner?" I nodded. "Do you want to press charges?" I looked over at Karen. She was still protesting, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Then she made the mistake of turning to me. "You wouldn't do that, would you?" she pleaded. Oh, she had some nerve. I crossed my arms. "You stole my boat. You almost killed a fisherman. You crashed into a buoy. And now I have to fix your mess." She scoffed. "Oh my God, it's just a boat ride. You're being so dramatic." That did it. I turned to the officer. "Throw the book at her." Karen's jaw dropped. "What?" Jim clapped me on the back. "Oh, this is gonna be good." As the Coast Guard hauled Karen off my boat, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The nightmare wasn't over, but at least the worst was behind me. Or so I thought. Because when Karen turned back to me, her eyes flashing with rage, I knew this wasn't the last I'd be hearing from her. And that was the real problem. I watched as the Coast Guard officers tightened their grip on Karen, who was still flailing like a cat being dragged into a bathtub. She wasn't going quietly, that much was clear. Her sun hat had flown off in the chaos, and her perfectly styled blonde hair was now an absolute disaster, strands sticking out in every direction. She looked more like a shipwreck survivor than a boat thief, but somehow, she still had the nerve to act like she was the victim here. "This is ridiculous. You can't just arrest people for borrowing things." Karen shrieked as the officers tried to get her onto their patrol boat. One of the officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with mirrored sunglasses, barely flinched. "Ma'am, you are being detained for the unauthorized use of a marine vessel, reckless endangerment, and failure to comply with maritime regulations." Karen let out a dramatic gasp, like he had just accused her of high treason. "Reckless endangerment? Oh please, I was perfectly in control. I've driven jet skis before, this was no different." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You nearly capsized a fishing boat, collided with a buoy and sped through a no-wake zone. That's reckless endangerment." Karen crossed her arms and let out a scoff. "That's all just technicalities. No one got hurt." Then she turned to me and fixed me with a glare so intense that if looks could sink ships, Sea Breeze would have been at the bottom of the ocean. "You're really going to let them do this to me? Over a little joyride?" I stared at her, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity. "Karen, you stole my boat. Oh my God, for the last time, I borrowed it. And I was gonna bring it back. I don't see what the big deal is. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to explode. Karen, borrowing requires permission. You didn't ask. You just took it. She rolled her eyes like I was some nitpicking bureaucrat denying her a minor convenience. Well, duh, I knew you'd say no. That's why I didn't ask. Jim, who had been quietly recording the whole thing on his phone, let out a bark of laughter. Oh wow. That's an amazing legal defense. I knew you'd say no, so I took it anyway. Karen, you should be a lawyer. Karen whipped around to glare at him next. Shut up, Jim. Jim just smirked and took another sip of his coffee, unfazed. Touchy. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard officers had had enough. They finally managed to secure Karen in handcuffs, which only made her more dramatic. She gasped like someone had just yanked a royal crown off her head. Excuse me? This is unbelievable. Do you know who I am? Officer Riley, the woman leading the team, adjusted her radio and answered without looking up. No, and I don't care. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't just. We can, Officer Riley interrupted. And we are. Karen huffed and looked around for support. Her eyes landed on Todd, her husband, who had just arrived at the dock. His face was a mix of exhaustion and resignation, like a man who had been through this exact scenario one too many times. He rubbed his temples as he approached. Karen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 headaches. What did you do? Oh, don't Karen me, she snapped, yanking at the cuffs. They're overreacting. I just took his boat for a little while. It's not like I stole a car. Todd turned to me, looking more apologetic than I had ever seen him. I am so sorry, he said. I don't even know what to say. I shrugged, still too angry to fully accept his apology. Not much to say, man. Your wife stole my boat. Todd sighed. Yeah. I figured. Jim, still recording, leaned toward me and whispered. He didn't even look surprised. I nodded. Probably not his first time dealing with this. Todd rubbed his face, then turned back to Karen. I told you not to do this. I told you. Karen scoffed. Oh, come on, Todd. Are you really going to take his side over mine? Todd hesitated, clearly debating the wisdom of his next words. Then he exhaled, looked at the Coast Guard officers and said, Yeah, Karen. I am. Karen's face twisted in betrayal. Todd! Todd threw his hands up. Karen, I don't know how to keep defending this kind of stuff. It's always something with you. Karen turned back to me, her expression shifting into something that might have been genuine remorse if she weren't so infuriatingly self-centered. Look, if it's really that big of a deal, I'll pay for any damages, okay? Just don't press charges. I shook my head. Too late. Her eyes widened. Wait. What? The Coast Guard is handling this now. It's out of my hands. Karen's face went through several shades of horror before she let out an incredulous laugh. Oh my God. You are such a baby about this. I clenched my jaw. Karen, you put other people in danger. You don't just get to walk away from that. She opened her mouth to argue, but Todd cut in. Karen, just stop. You're not getting out of this. She turned back to him, eyes pleading. But Todd, honey. No, Todd said firmly. No more excuses. Karen looked at him, then at the Coast Guard officers, then at me. She finally seemed to realize that there was no getting out of this one. Her shoulders slumped, and she muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, "This is so unfair." As the Coast Guard led her toward their boat, Jim let out a low whistle. Man. She really thought she could Karen her way out of that. I shook my head, still trying to process the insanity of the last hour. I'm just glad it's over. But Jim, ever the troublemaker, just grinned. Oh, buddy. It's not over. I frowned. What do you mean? Jim held up his phone, showing me the screen. Dude. I posted the video of her screaming about a borrow 15 minutes ago. I blinked. And... Jim wiggled his eyebrows. It already has 20,000 views. A slow, almost wicked grin spread across my face as I realized what that meant. Karen had made her bed, and now? She was about to be famous for it. And something told me that was going to drive her even crazier than the Coast Guard ever could. By the time the Coast Guard hauled Karen onto their patrol boat, a small crowd had gathered at the dock, most of them fellow boaters who had heard the commotion and wanted to see what was going on. Some people were whispering, others were openly laughing, and a few were already scrolling through their phones, probably watching the now viral video Jim had uploaded. Karen sat on the patrol boat's bench, arms crossed, her face scrunched up like a child who had been told they couldn't have dessert. She still hadn't fully accepted that she was actually in trouble. Every few seconds she'd huff and mutter something to the officers, as if she was expecting them to suddenly realize this was all a huge misunderstanding and let her go. Meanwhile, Todd stood at the dock, rubbing his face like a man who had aged 10 years in an hour. He finally looked up at me and let out a deep sigh. I swear, I don't know what to do with her. I wanted to feel bad for him, but I couldn't bring myself to. Might be time to start with actions have consequences. Todd gave a humorless chuckle. Oh, I've tried. Believe me. Jim, still grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, stepped up beside me. So, what do you think her Yelp review of the Coast Guard is gonna look like? I snorted. 1 star. Did not let me keep stolen boat. Rude. Todd groaned. That's not even a joke. She actually leaves reviews like that. I stared at him. You're kidding. Wish I was, Todd muttered. One of the Coast Guard officers, the same one who had been unbothered by Karen's meltdown earlier, approached me. Sir, we're going to need you to fill out some paperwork regarding the incident. And if you'd like to press additional charges beyond what we've already cited her for, now's the time. Karen perked up at that, whipping her head toward me. Oh, come on. You don't have to do that. You've made your point. I crossed my arms. Have I? Because you still don't seem to think you did anything wrong. Karen scoffed. I've already said I'll pay for the damages. What more do you want? Jim spoke up before I could. An ounce of self-awareness? Karen shot him a glare so fierce it could have melted steel. I turned back to the officer. What happens if I don't press any additional charges? She'll still face fines, a temporary boating ban, and mandatory community service, the officer replied. But if you'd like to pursue additional legal action, that's your choice. I glanced at Karen, who was now glaring at Todd as if this was somehow his fault. I wasn't the type to hold a grudge, but this wasn't a simple case of a neighbor borrowing something without asking. She had put people in danger, damaged my boat, and had the gall to act like she was the victim. Still, I wasn't about to drag this out for months in court. I shook my head. I think the public humiliation is punishment enough. Karen looked almost relieved until Jim added, plus, she's never gonna live this down. This video is everywhere. Karen's eyes snapped to him. Wait. What? Jim grinned and held up his phone. Oh yeah. The internet loves you, Karen. Karen lunged forward as if she could somehow stop it, only to be yanked back by the officer. Take that down. That's illegal. Jim raised an eyebrow. No it's not. You were in public, and I filmed an actual crime happening. That's fair game. Karen turned to Todd, pure desperation in her eyes. Todd, do something. Todd, to his credit, actually seemed to think about it for half a second. Then he shrugged. You did this to yourself. Karen let out an inhuman noise somewhere between a shriek and a groan. The officer, clearly done with this whole ordeal, signaled for his team to wrap things up. All right, let's get moving. We'll be in touch regarding your boat repairs, sir. I nodded, watching as they pulled away from the dock with Karen still muttering to herself about the injustice of it all. As soon as they were out of earshot, Jim burst out laughing. Oh my God! That was art! Todd let out another sigh, rubbing his temples. I need a drink. Jim patted him on the back. Man, you deserve one. The next few days were a blur of insurance calls, repair estimates, and way too many notifications from people sending me clips of the video. It had exploded overnight, racking up millions of views. People couldn't get enough of Karen's rant about a borrow, and someone had even remixed it into a song. I wasn't sure what was funnier, the fact that she had become a meme, or the fact that she had no idea yet. That changed when I saw her at the marina a week later. She had shown up for her first day of community service, wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. It didn't help. Everyone still recognized her. I was sitting on a bench near the dock when she spotted me. Her expression went from embarrassed to furious in record time. She stomped over, her cleaning supplies rattling in the bucket she was carrying. "This is your fault," she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. "My fault? You stole my boat." Karen scoffed. "I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for that stupid video." Jim, who was standing next to me, grinned. "Oh, you saw it?" Karen clenched her jaw. "It's everywhere. People at the grocery store point at me." Jim nodded, looking far too pleased. "Yeah, that makes sense. It's got like, 15 million views now." Karen groaned. "I hate the internet." I leaned back, enjoying the moment. "Maybe next time, don't steal a boat." Karen glared at me, then looked around the marina, clearly searching for someone to back her up. No one did. In fact, most people avoided eye contact entirely, probably hoping they wouldn't get dragged into whatever meltdown she was about to have. With a frustrated sigh, she stomped off toward the dockside bathrooms, where her assigned cleaning duties awaited. Jim shook his head, watching her go. "Man, you think she learned anything?" I smirked. "Not a chance." Jim grinned. "Still, best day ever." I couldn't help but agree. My boat would get repaired, Karen was finally facing consequences, and thanks to the internet, she'd be a cautionary tale for entitled boat thieves everywhere. Sometimes karma worked fast.